Did anybody wake up this morning and just say, oh, thank goodness, I'm saving so much daylight? Or maybe you woke up and were going, spring forward or spring back? Spring forward or spring back? Which one is it? What time is it? Am I an hour late or 2 hours early? Hypothetically, did anybody else go? No, just, okay, me. Fine, that's fine. I got here on time, I'll have everyone know, but it's confusing. I think it's our last one. Is that right? It's the last time? No? I thought it was our last time we have to deal with this. Speaking of confusion, how do you know how much something weighs? How do you know how long something is? If you go to Home Depot and buy a yardstick, I don't know if they sell those, what am I trying to, tape measure? And you go to Lowe's and buy a tape measure, how do you know they're measuring the same thing? Right? They got the same units, right? Okay. How? How do they have the same units? Have you ever wondered this? Well, I learned some things. I did a little bit of digging. There was this artillery general in France. Maybe you've heard of him, named Napoleon. And he had a problem. People kept trading with England, and he didn't like it. He needed Russia specifically to stop trading with England. I'm oversimplifying history here a little bit, but stay with me. And so what Napoleon needed was all of Europe to be under the same units and measurements. And so he mandated that all measurements be regulated. It also simplified things quite a bit, right? If you're going to market and there's all these just kind of colloquial units of measurements. I'll trade you 5 forearms of yarn for 6 feet of cloth. Well, whose feet? His feet? His feet are tiny. No, I'm not trading you that. What's the conversion for forearms to feet? What's the conversion of a bunch to a bushel? It's really hard. So, in this age of enlightenment, do you know what they did? They measured the circumference of the earth because they were just learning out that they knew how to do that. They divided it by a quarter, and then they divided that quarter by 10 million. And do you know what they got? A meter. A meter. And then they cast a meter exactly in metal. And this is now forever, well, until 2016, what a meter is. And then do you know what they did? They then they divided that meter by 10, made it into a cube, and they filled the cube with metal, and then they weighed it. And do you know what that was? A kilogram. Show this picture. Show that picture. That is the kilogram. It's not a kilogram. It's not that if you measured a kilogram, it would be close. It would be that if you had a kilogram measurement and it didn't weigh what that was, it's not a kilogram because that's the kilogram. Why is this important? Well, we only really know the length or the weight or the brightness or the heats or the length of time of anything based on its measurement, based on comparison to something else. We've been in this text before. In fact, I think 8 weeks ago, Jack started off our Love First sermon series by talking about Matthew's version of this same story. And you might be wondering, why are we so soon to go back to Mark's version of this same story? Well, a couple of reasons. One, it's important. Jesus said it's the most important, so okay. But it's also who we're saying we are. we are a church, the Northside Church of Christ, and you might have seen in some of our print and some of our signs that underneath Northside it says love first, because that's kind of our introduction to people who may not know what kind of a church we are. We want them to know that we take Jesus' message seriously, and so we love first. But I also think that this is such a critical story because Jesus shows us how we measure our love for God. So, Jesus actually starts Mark starts this section of stories about Jesus with a parable in the beginning of this chapter, the parable of the vineyard. This is going to form a brilliant, beautiful, tight, short story where we need to really see kind of these 4 stories as the vineyard and 3 stories of Jesus being questioned as one short story, one brilliant, beautiful, tight, short story by the gospel writer Mark. And the subject of this short story is Jesus reliable? Is Jesus reliable? That's the question that seems to start this. So Jesus is telling a parable one day, and he was going to kick off this questioning of Jesus time with this parable that you've probably heard before. A man plants a vineyard. He sets up a watchtower, and he appoints people to lease the vineyard. I'm going to break the cardinal sin of short story storytellers and tell you what this story is about. It's kind of like explaining the punchline to a joke. I'm sorry. We kind of have to move a little quickly here. This story is an allegory of Israel's priesthood. An allegory is a story where there's a one-to-one correlation between everything. And the people who are leasing the vineyard are Israel's priesthood. God has created a world, the vineyard. That world is for life and vitality. It's supposed to make wine. Wine's going to represent zip, energy, full of lifeness. A man plants a vineyard and he puts people in charge of leasing, tending to the lifeblood of the vineyard. Well, what do? They decide it's ours. Jesus is making a choice in this short story. And pretty soon the people listening to it, the scribes and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they realize it's about them. They realize they are the ones who, as the master has sent his representatives, and they've beat one up, and then beat another up, and then he sent a third one, and he killed that one. They killed that one. And a year in and year out it went until he sent his own son, and they killed him. Jesus also tells the punchline of the story. The one on whom the cornerstone has been built, the builders rejected. You scribes and Pharisees, you are the leasers of the vineyard. You made the vineyard about you, all the while making it look like you were protecting it, making it look like you were doing good for the vineyard and the owner. And so they said, we're going to arrest him. And what follows are 3 stories where Jesus gets questioned. Is Jesus reliable? What's at stake here is, can Jesus be trusted by the common people, all the while being tested by those who think they know the law better than Jesus? Jesus, with the parable of the vineyard, has seen himself thrown inside of a trap. And he's going to get questioned 3 times. The stories, they might seem disconnected to the characters inside of them at first, but if we look at them the whole, we're going to see Mark develop another question here, a question that's going to stay with us longer. He's going to tell the story in 3 parts. Part 1, Jesus is questioned about the government. They come to him and they say, Jesus, Look at this coin right here. See that coin? Should we pay taxes to Caesar or shouldn't we? Well, this is a pretty good trap. You see, Caesar over in Rome is telling people he is the son of a god. Caesar, according to Jewish law, is doing, what am I trying to say? He's blaspheming. That's a word. He's blaspheming. He's saying that he is a god. He is a son of a god. And so Israelites find themselves in a bit of a pickle. On one hand, they can pay taxes and participate in the blaspheming of Caesar. Or they can not. And so defy any number of laws in their own law code that talk about faithfulness to the kings. The kings happen to have been completely complicit with Caesar, but you see the problem that the average Israelite is in. And so they give Jesus this terrible question that he can't win. And they say, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? Either way he answers, they can arrest him. Jesus says, whose face is on that coin you're holding? And they said, Caesar. You know what Jesus says. Well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but whatever is God's, keep that for God. And they go away frustrated because they didn't catch him like they thought they would. Test 2, Jesus is questioned about hope, about specifically religious hope. The Sadducees are a particular religious sect. Their name, Sadducees, comes from the Hebrew word to be righteous. These guys, they're all guys. These guys are really good. They do it all right. And they do not believe in the resurrection of the dead. This creates them, and it puts them in a particular spot. They believe that following the law is its own reward. And they follow the law to a T. But they don't believe that there's any hope beyond following the law for the sake of the law. You just follow the law because it's right. And so, because they follow the law so well, they have no problems at all about wearing the finest clothes and having the finest houses and keeping as much wealth for themselves as they can, and they have no particular need to share any of their righteously gained wealth with any other Israelite, because if they were as good as we were, they would be as wealthy as we are. And so the Sadducees come to Jesus and, with mocking tones, say, hey, teacher, we got a question about this resurrection of the dead you keep talking about. Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no child, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. There were 7 brothers. The first married and he died and left no children. The second married the widow and died, leaving no children. And the third, likewise, none of the 7 brothers left children. Last of all, the woman herself dies. In this resurrection, whose wife is she? They are openly mocking the religious hope of those non-uber wealthy Israelites who are in the hearing. They are mocking the idea that following God's law, might have for them a reward of life beyond life. And Jesus hears this and he says, is not this the reason you are wrong? You've just laid out you've just perfectly described why you don't get it. That you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For when people rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. That does not mean that they are less real. It means that they're really real. God is not a God of the dead, but a God of the living. Whose wife is she? You're missing the headline. She's alive, though she died. And they walk away and they're frustrated. They couldn't quite trap him. Finally, a scribe, who by this point, when a scribe is introduced, we've had the parable of the vineyards, we've had render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and now we've had the Sadducees. So when we hear a particular scribe, we should hear in our heads, boo, boo, another one. A particular scribe comes to Jesus and says, what is the greatest commandment? This was a normal question. Teachers would get this question all the time because it was a quick way of saying, what kind of teacher are you? And Jesus answers happily. This is a straightforward question. This is not a question to trap Jesus. This is a curiosity question to get to know Jesus better. Jesus says, Deuteronomy 6:4 and following. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul. That's what we say all the time, right? Some people think that Jewish boys and girls would have been taught this among their first sentences. And we know from Deuteronomy 6:4 that they would repeat this every time they walked out of their doorways because they would put this text on their doorways. They would tie this text on phylacteries, which are like little leather boxes, and super religious Jews would tie this on the leather boxes on their foreheads, and they would touch it, and they would say to themselves, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love the Lord. They would say it over and over and over again. This is their greatest liturgy. This is the first sentence some of them have ever learned. And then Jesus says, and we don't quite get this right in our English. There's no English translation that quite gets it right. The second is exactly the same. It's not like it. It's not, well, it's similar, but it's kind of like under. No, it's exactly the same. It's the unit of measurement by which you judge the trueness of the other. Love your neighbor as yourself. Leviticus 26:1. Jesus says, do you want to know how much the first commandment actually weighs? Do you want to know the length and width of it? Do you want to know what it actually is? Well, you'll know it when somebody loves their neighbor as themselves. You'll then really know if they love God with all their heart, mind, strength, and soul. Jesus could have picked other second commandments. There was a lot of them. Jesus could have said, well, the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul. And the second is like it, Leviticus 18:5. You must keep all of my laws and statutes. You must be like the Sadducees. You see the Sadducees? You see how well they keep all the laws? The true weight and measurement of Deuteronomy 6:4, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul, is really keeping all of my statutes and commandments. The Sadducees have got it right. But that's not the second law he chose. Jesus could have said, Leviticus 26:1, the greatest command is love the Lord your God. And the second is like it, Leviticus 26:1, have no other gods before me. He could have said the true weight and measurement of how you love God is whether or not you bow down to Caesar or not. It's really your political involvements, whether you dive headlong in or avoid it completely, or anywhere on that spectrum. He could have said the true weight and measurement of God, loving God, is whether or not you obey Leviticus 26:1, do not worship other gods. But he doesn't. He says the true weight and measurement of loving God is how well you love the person next to you, or the person not all that like you. There is no way of hating people and loving God. You can't hate any person and tell yourself you continue to love God. You can't even hate people in God's name and tell yourself you're doing it because you love God so much. Jesus says that's just not how it works. So Jesus gets questioned by the scribe, and what we learn is, turns out there are some good scribes. Because Jesus says this. He says, Deuteronomy 6:4 and Leviticus 26, and the scribe says, yeah, that's what I think too. You're right in saying that God is one God and that we should just love the Lord our God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And you're right in saying that there is no love of God without loving our neighbors as ourselves. And Jesus says this weird thing. It's almost like he puts the answer back in the mouth of the guy who's just saying, you answered right. Jesus says, you've answered right. The kingdom of God is so close to you. The kingdom of God is right where you are. It turns out there are some good scribes, which is good news for us. Because in the allegory of the vineyard, we've got to put ourselves in the character spot of the priests. God has not said America or any other nation is my new nation of priests. God has said through Jesus, the church is my nation of priests. We are the priests to the world. We are the manifestation of hope to the world. The world will not know about Jesus Christ without the church. And so we've got to put ourselves in that spot when we read the parable of the vineyard. Have we stolen the vineyard for our own sake? Or are we like the one good scribe who really gets what the greatest commandment is all about? And what Mark, the master storyteller, has done is done this game of shifting cinematographers. The Oscars are coming up. Someone's about to win the best cinematographer. And at first, we thought Mark had the camera pointed at Jesus. What kind of a teacher is he really? And throughout this short story, we've kept the camera on Jesus, and he keeps shifting it, and it's frustrating. And finally, it gets focused on someone else. It gets focused on the one good scribe. And we stay on the one good scribe just long enough to realize, oh no, it's looking at us. Jesus begins this short story as being the one question. Before long, before it's over, we realize we're being questioned. Of course we're being questioned. We know this. The world looks at this yellow church that sits just above the tree line on 281, and I guarantee you, once a day, someone driving on 281 says, I wonder what kind of church that is. What kind of Christians are in there? Well, I wonder if they're the kind of Christians who, come election time, are going to cancel me for my political beliefs. I wonder if they're the kind of Christians who, come election time, are going to just think I am an uneducated young idiot for my political beliefs. Are they going to say the true weight and measurement of you as a person is whether or not you agree with us politically? Are they the kind of church where I've got to fit in to get in? Do I need to follow every single one of their religious beliefs before they're going to be kind to me or greet me or treat me like a neighbor? Am I supposed to know all of their political beliefs before I can walk in the door? Am I supposed to be righteous? Is that really how I figure out if that kind of church is going to love me or not? I wonder what kind of Christians go to that church. Maybe we can communicate something with this this phrase we're trying to put on all this North Side stuff, love first. I think it'll help. I can't hurt. But until people come into contact with you and you love them first, they're going to have a really hard time believing you love God. Because the unbelieving world is not the uneducated world. It's not like they don't know about Jesus. What we hear about those unchurched are that time and time again, I don't mind Jesus, it's the Christians who don't follow him, who don't love me, I have a problem with. I don't want anything to do with a church like that. And you know what? Good for them. Good for them. Why would they want anything to do with people who have heard their leader say the greatest thing you can do is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul. Leave nothing of who you are behind loving God. And the true weight and measurement of that is loving your neighbor. Who wants to be around people who have heard that and said, well, there's some caveats? It doesn't sound like it. Jesus doesn't list any caveats. What if our neighbors who have been turned off by Christianity because of so many interactions with Christians actually have understood the call of Christ quite well? What if someone is just looking for a Christian and asking themselves, are you the kind of Christian who will love me? Well, I hope so. I hope there's someone else out there looking for someone to take Jesus' message of love, mission of love seriously. I hope some of us can be that person that someone's looking for. During the season of following Jesus, this painting here that Ben is still working on, underneath that are the words of so many of us who wrote with their fingers where they were starting this season, February 14th. Take a moment, think back where you were February 14th. Where were you starting this season where we follow Jesus? Where are you now? Where is he leading you? Jesus leads us in this particular season to get in touch with the part of ourselves that keeps us from being loved by God. Sometimes I think our inability to love our neighbors is because we have not yet fully encountered a love without end that has not loved us because we're righteous or because we think the right things politically or because of any number of other things, but because we are his sons and we are his daughters. Can you be loved with all of God's heart, with all of God's mind and soul and strength? Can you be filled to the brim with the love of God? Your neighbor is wondering, are you the kind of Christian that will love me? Church, will you stand as our worship team comes forward and receive this blessing? May the peace of our Lord Jesus Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you into the wilderness. May he protect you in the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at all the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into these doors.